Hi everyone, welcome back. Let's discuss some of the commonly asked interview questions and answers during any Flutter job interview. Most of these questions, or at least some of these questions, will be surely asked in any of the Flutter interview. So they are I have gathered some of the most common questions. So let's go through them one by one. So what are the different types of widgets in Flutter? Flutter has actually two types of widgets, stateful widgets and stateless widgets. Stateful widget is a widget which changes its state depending on the user interactions or the input, while the stateless widget does not change its state. So what are some of the examples of these two widgets? For example, the stateless widgets are any icon, for example, or button element. They are both stateless widgets, or text. So so they are all stateless because they don't change their state depending on the user interaction, or the input. While stateful widget, they change their state. Let's say radio button, for example. Radio button, you can click, and then it can be switched on or off, this radio. Slider also changes its state on user interaction. You can slide and it can change its state. It can change its state, depending on where you move the slider. Checkbox, etc., and any text input field also, so this is a stateful widget. It will change its state, and there is a function called set state that will be called every time to set the state of the widget after the user interacts with these widgets like radio and slider, etc. So the state of these widgets is actually stored in an object, in a separate object, which is called some state object, and this object is interacting with this. The set state is actually trying to kind of set the state of this object, and this object, with the state of this object, is different from the appearance of these widgets. So this is the difference between a stateless widget and a stateful widget. So let's go ahead. So you can be also asked, what is a stateful widget separately? So as I said here in this slide, stateful widget is a widget that holds the state of the widget, and it rebuilds on the state change. So for example, if the user interacts and changes the state of the radio button or a slider or a checkbox, then this set state function is going to be called in the background. It's going to set the state of the object here, of this object, and then it's going to redraw these widgets, on the rebuild. So that's how this whole stateful widget works. So next, stateless widget. Stateless widget built only when created, and or if the parent changes. So if the parent container is changed, let's say you have a container, the parent container, and you have the widget inside it, give it a different color, and it can be anything. Maybe it's a button, maybe it's anything. So if you the state of this widget will only change if the parent widget is changing. Otherwise it will never change, because these widgets don't hold. They don't change their state on any user interactions or input. So this is the difference between stateless and stateful widgets in Flutter. What is Flutter? Flutter is actually an open source software development kit. It is developed by Google, And using Flutter software development kit, you can design applications for Android platform, iOS, web, desktop, Mac, so it's cross-platform, and using a single code base you can design or you can write applications for all these platforms. Flutter was developed in 2015, I think. Flutter basically uses this Dart programming language. It's also a relatively new language, and you can program write Flutter applications using this Dart programming language. And another feature of Flutter is the Flutter applications are run on this Flutter engine. The Flutter engine is kind of you can say a runtime environment for Flutter applications. It's written in C++, and it's quite portable, across different platforms. You can run Flutter applications using this. And another important feature of Flutter is that it has like two main frameworks for widgets, you can say. One is this material design, which is from Google, and that is for, of course, our Android kind of applications or web. And the other is this Cupertino widgets. So this is developed by Apple, for the iOS devices. So Flutter widgets are in two categories, then divided. One is this material design, and the other is Cupertino. So sorry, not Cupertino. It was a typo. Cupertino. And there is one important point. This Flutter uses this foundation library. Foundation library is actually this set of classes and libraries or functions that are written in this Dart programming language, and using this these classes you can kind of write these Flutter applications. So this foundation library, material design, and Cupertino sets of two different sets of widgets, Dart programming language, and Flutter engine, they are some of features of this this Flutter software development kit, open source Flutter software development kit. So build modes in Flutter. There are actually three kinds of modes for compilation of apps in Flutter: debug mode, profile mode, and release mode. So this debug mode is used during development, and during the development phase, actually we normally use the hot reload and not the hot restart, because in hot reload you don't initialize the states to their default values, so they just compile very quickly during development. So compilation is optimized for very fast development in debug mode. The assertions are also enabled, service extensions are enabled, debugging is also enabled, and the app is compiled using this Dart devc compiler. You write it like this: Dart devc compiler is used for compiling in the debug mode, and we can make an arrow here. So this is used. So what is a profile mode now? Well, the profile mode is something in between the debug mode and the release mode. So some part of debugging is enabled, but not all of it. Only that part of debugging is enabled that is related to your device performance, as the name profile shows. So it is more closer to the release mode, but the only difference is that some kind of tracing information that is related to the performance of your app is enabled. Some service extensions are enabled, of course, and we use this Dart2JS compiler for the compilation of the apps in the profile mode. And the same compiler, that is Dart to JS compiler, is also used for release mode. Release mode is of course used for when you have to release your app, so you don't need any kind of debugging information or any kind of profiling information, like performance information is not, so the debugging is completely switched off in the release mode, and assertions and service extension are also completely disabled. So also there is one other mode which is used for testing, that we call it a headless mode. So the headless mode is only used for testing. Actually in the testing mode, it's a testing mode kind of, you know. For compiling we only have these three modes: debug, profile, and release. And that's a bit about the build modes in Flutter. Provider, what is a provider in Flutter? So providers are actually the types of widgets which you use if you want to, let's say, provide a certain value or data to, like, any, you can say, data model object to anywhere in the widget tree. So that's the main use of provider. So a provider is simply a widget which can be used to provide data to other, you know, points in the widget tree, or any other widget in the widget tree. So the first point here states they are used in state management, of course, if you want to, you know, kind of propagate the state between the widgets, and based on publisher subscriber method. Yeah, so in a provider you usually have one publisher, one publishing class that is actually providing the data, and then there are multiple consumers who consume this data. And in the publisher class, where we want, like, where we change the data, or which provides the data, we use this function notify change listener. So this notify change listener actually updates when we use this in this provider class. It updates all the, or in the publisher class, it updates all the consumers, you know, about any change on this data, you know. So if we have a function in our publisher class that is kind of responsible for changing the data, let's say we have a class which is kind of incrementing a counter, so we will simply call this notify change listener in this class, and that will then update all the consumers that are listening to this publisher. So this is a simple definition of provider. So let's see here. So we have a provider class and a consumer class. You see, it can be more than one consumers. So we, in the provider class, we have a function provider. You can have any name here, and then you do something in this function, and then you call this notify change listener inside this provider class. And then this notify change listener is actually informing all the consumers. You know, you can have one consumer here, you can have one consumer here, so you can have multiple consumers, you know. And and how do you access this data in the consumer? Of course, you use this provider.auth. You provide this class name here, which is the provider class, and you also provide the context of this consumer. And then you listen is false because we are not listening to any values here in this class. So if we want to listen to some values, we can set this listen to true. And then dot provider function, we call this function here, and then whatever is done, this will be done, and this notify change listener will update the latest state to all the consumers. So this is a simple block diagram explanation of the provider in Flutter. And let's go now to this diagram. Let's say we have a widget tree. We have this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, all these widgets. And let's say we are at this widget, and if this widget, we can give it a color of green. So if this widget is the provider, So it means that all of these widgets, you know, they are will be able to listen to this provider, you know. Okay, so yeah, so all this he will be listening. This provider is providing, kind of is a provider for all these consumers. So let's say if we want a provider which is going to let's say you know, going to, let's say 6 and 7 are going to listen to it. So where can we define it? Let's say we pick another provider here. We call it let's say with the name X, and let's say we put this here, or let's say we put this provider not at this place but at this place. So this is and then only 6 and 7 want to listen to it. So this is not a very efficient, you know, implementation. If we bring it like at this location somewhere, so from here both 6 and 7 can listen to it. Of course we cannot bring it here because then only 6 can listen to it and not 7. So this is the most optimum place to, you know, kind of place the provider in this widget tree. Of course, placing it anywhere else could work also, like placing it up there also could work, even up there could also work, but this is the place where I think its location is the best when it comes to efficiency. And yeah, so this is the provider, and 6 and 7, let's color them differently. They are the listeners to this provider X. Yeah, so that's a bit of explanation of provider widget tree. What is the difference between main and run app in Flutter? Well, main is just like, you know, you have a main function in Java program, which is the main entry point of the program. In Dart, it's the same. So you can't run any program in Flutter without main. It doesn't matter if this is with UI or without UI. So this is main. Main is actually the main entry point of the program in Flutter, just like Java, etc. in other languages. So run app is actually used. Run app actually, it returns a widget which is the root widget. You know, this widget is attached to the screen as the root of the all the widgets, or root widget of the screen. You know, that's what run app returns us. You know, and actually in Flutter the run app is always used within the main function, because main function is the main entry point. You know, and this run app is providing that widget, that is the root widget, that is attached to the screen. So but there are other things that we can do also before attaching this, you know, root widget to the screen. For example, theme colors, user sign in status, etc. Other configuration things you can actually you know, set before in the main before even attaching the first root widget to the screen using run app. So that's the difference. You know, main is the main entry program in Flutter, or main entry of any program inside Flutter. Without it you cannot run any other Flutter program. It doesn't matter if it has a UI or no UI. And run app is used inside the main to attach the first or the root widget in the widget tree for any screen. You know, so there are two ways to compile your app in Flutter. One is called hot reload, the other is hot restart. So hot reload is normally used during the development mode, where you quickly compile, you know, whenever you change something in the code, you quickly compile it and send it to the Dart virtual machine, and that updates your UIs or the widgets, you know, widget UIs with this new code. The hot reload normally preserve the states. You do not set the states to default values, and that's why it takes a bit shorter time, than hot restart. Hot reload actually builds your widget tree from scratch, completely new with a new code. If you have changed a lot, maybe you have changed your widget tree and everything, then you can do a hot restart. It of course destroys all the preserved states and sets all the states to their default values, and that's why it takes much more time than hot reload. So that's the difference between hot reload and hot restart. Hot reload preserves the states, doesn't initialize the states to the initial values, and just compiles the code without initializing the whole widget tree or rebuilding the whole widget tree, while hot reload rebuilds the whole widget tree, reinitiates the reinitializes all of your states and destroys all the preserved states, and that's why hot restart takes more time than hot reload. So what is profile mode in Flutter? Profile mode in Flutter is used to analyze performance. Like, we have three kind of modes in Flutter. Debug mode. Debug mode is normally used for debugging your application during development. And then profile, in debug mode, everything is switched on, like all the kind of tracing information. In profile mode and debug mode, the difference is that in profile mode, only performance related tracing information is enabled, and we use this .2js compiler for this profile mode, which is the same compiler that you use for a release mode. For debug mode, we use this .dev compiler. And and the command for Flutter run is -- profile. Uses some debugging ability only. As I said, mobile performance overlays are enabled, tracing to some level is enabled, something in between release and debug mode. Okay, so tree shaking performed on build. Yeah, so this is what profile mode is. You use this compiling mode to kind of analyze the performance of your app. So packages and modules, what is the difference between them? Packages are actually, they add a new functionality to your Flutter app. This functionality is normally always available. For example, if you have a payment package, or if you have some graph package or something, you define this package with some version in your .yaml file, and then you can get this, and then you kind of import this in your .dart file, and then you can use this functionality in your Flutter application. So that's how we use package. Packages are some existing functionality that is already implemented, that is already available in the Flutter, and you can put some package, you can choose some package, and you can use this functionality in your Flutter application. Modules are actually used if you want to, if you have some Flutter kind of implementation, and if you want to use this with some existing native application, if you want to integrate Flutter with this new existing application, that's where you use modules. So it means that you create a functionality in Flutter, which is a Flutter module, and then you import it, or you add it to some existing native application, like in your Android application or in your iOS application. So a Flutter module is going to be imported into this native application. That's all. And packages are like already available functionality in Flutter, which is used in Flutter. So you can think of it this way. And then next come packages and plugins. So packages we already talked about. Package can add a new functionality available to Flutter. You don't need any native code, of course. All code is in Dart. The package is written in Dart, and you add this package to your Flutter application, so everything is in Dart. While module was, you have some functionality in Dart, and then you add this functionality to native application like Android or Android or iOS. And plugin, so plugin is actually the other way around of the module. Like, you have in plugin, you have some functionality that is already written in native code, like in Android or iOS, and then you use this in your Flutter application. So this is called a package. So package is also a plugin. So plugin is also a special kind of package. In the plugin you can have native code, for example Android code, iOS code, and you don't want to implement this existing functionality in Flutter, and you just pick this plugin which is already written in Android or iOS, and then you put it in your Flutter application, you know, and this is what plugin is. So next is operators, you know, null operators, null aware operators. So null aware operators are used in the Dart language. For example, we have this question mark 2 times and then equal to. This is something like if we write here x, and you know, and then we write here y, so we will, you know, assign y to x only if x is null. Okay, that's how this is used. And then if you have this question mark only, if you have, let's say, x here and y here, so this you will use something like this. You have, let's say, z here, and so z will be assigned x if x is not null, otherwise you will assign z y. So z will be x if x is not null. If x is null, z will be y. So you don't have this comma, sorry. So this is what these operators are, you know, these null operators. So in this case you have an x here and you have a y here again. So if x is null, we will use y. If x is null, we will have y, otherwise we will use x, which is the value of x, you know. In this case x will be assigned to z if x is not null. If x is null, y will be assigned to z. So this is null aware operators in Dart.